You know, one of the first things we all learn in science class, well, what if I told you it's kind of wrong? Today, we're going to take a much deeper look at something you probably think you know inside and out, your senses.
So let me ask you a simple question. How many senses do you have? Go on, say it out loud. I bet you didn't even have to think about it, right?
Of course, you said 5. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. It's the classic answer, and it's so ingrained in us, it feels just as basic as having 2 arms and 2 legs.
But here's the thing. That number, it doesn't actually come from modern science. It's a hand-me-down from the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. We're talking over 2,000 years ago.
And it turns out that this simple question, well, it opens up a huge philosophical rabbit hole. The real answer is nowhere near settled, and the debate actually makes us question how we perceive reality itself.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the myth of the 5 senses. Then we'll look at the philosopher's rulebook, see if science has a better definition, and then get into the weird cases of the viper and the bat. Finally, we'll ask if maybe it's all just a useful convention and try to figure out what is a sense anyway.
All right, first up, the myth of 5 senses. Where did this number 5 even come from, and does it hold up?
I mean, the second you really think about it, the number 5 just feels wrong, too small. What about your sense of balance, or knowing if something is hot or cold, or, pain? Those are definitely distinct experiences, so why aren't they on the VIP list?
Okay, so to get a real answer, we can't just keep listing things. We need a rule book, right? A clear definition for what a sense actually is. And this is where the philosopher H.P. Grice steps in. He decided to try and write that rule book.
So Grice came up with this 4-part checklist. He said for something to count as a real sense, it has to have 1, a unique organ, like your eyes. 2, it perceives specific things, like colors. 3, it detects a specific physical feature, like light waves. And 4, it gives you a totally distinct experience. That feeling of what it's like to see something.
Now, you'd think this would settle things, but no. Grice's checklist actually just fired up the debate even more. It basically split everyone into 2 main camps, fighting over one huge question. Are we discovering what senses are, like finding a new planet, or are we just inventing them?
And this right here is the heart of the whole thing. You've got the realists, who believe senses are real, biological things out there in nature, just waiting for us to find them. And then you have the anti-realists. They say, nope, senses are just useful concepts we made up, like helpful labels to make sense of the world.
Let's look at the realist side first. A philosopher named Brian Keeley really tried to pin this down with a strict scientific checklist. For him, a true sense must have its own dedicated organ, detect a specific type of physical energy, serve a clear purpose for survival, and, importantly, have an evolutionary origin.
Sounds pretty solid, right? Well, the problem is, nature is messy. Keeley's neat and tidy checklist starts to fall apart when you look at some really interesting animals, like the pit viper and the vampire bat.
So let's take the pit viper. The scientists who actually study this stuff, neuroethologists, they all pretty much agree it uses 2 separate senses to hunt: regular old vision with its eyes and thermal imaging with these special pits on its face. Okay, so here's the problem for Keeley's rules. The viper's eyes see visible light. Its pits see infrared heat. Now physically, both of those are just electromagnetic radiation, same basic stuff. So according to Keeley's rule about a specific class of physical energy, that should be just 1 sense. But the scientists on the ground, they see 2 different organs doing 2 different jobs, and they call it 2 senses. The rules don't match reality. And then you have the vampire bat, which is the complete opposite problem. It detects heat using 2 different kinds of physical stimuli. By Keeley's rules, that should be 2 senses. But again, scientists just lump it all together and call it one thing: thermoregulation. So the so-called scientific checklist, it's just not working consistently.
You see how this gets tricky? These examples are a huge headache for the realist camp. It makes you wonder, what if the anti-realists have a point? What if trying to find a perfect biological definition is just the wrong way to think about it? So let's switch gears and look at the anti-realist side, led by a philosopher named Matthew Nudds. He says, hey, let's stop digging around in biology for these natural kinds. Instead, let's ask a different question. Why do we even bother making a distinction between senses? And his answer, it's all about psychology.
Here's his big idea. It's really useful for us to know how someone perceives something.
Knowing you saw a car coming tells me something different than if you just heard it. That distinction helps us predict what you'll do next. For Nudds, our idea of senses isn't about biology. It's a social tool. It's just a useful way we talk about how we know things.
So, where does all this leave us? We're right back where we started, but now it's clear why there's no simple answer. The number of senses you have isn't a scientific fact you can look up. It's really a choice you make about which framework, which definition you want to use.
Yeah, the debate gets really deep, as you can see here, with all these different approaches. But honestly, it all boils down to one fundamental question about how we categorize the world. Are we trying to discover what's really out there, or are we just creating a filing system that works for us?
Let's just break it down simply. If you stick with Aristotle, it's a tradition, and the answer is 5. Simple. If you're a scientific realist, like Keeley, it's a biological system, and the number is out there for us to discover. But if you're an anti-realist, like Nudds, a sense is just a useful psychological concept, and the number is whatever we all agree on.
So you see, the big takeaway here isn't a number. It's that this seemingly simple question we all learned in grade school is actually hiding a really deep philosophical puzzle. It makes you wonder, do our senses give us a direct, unfiltered view of reality? Or are they just a user interface, a tool that helps us navigate the world without showing us what it's really like?
So the next time someone asks you how many senses you have, you can tell them it's complicated. The answer isn't 5. The real question is this: is your perception a clear window onto reality, or is it just a useful story you tell yourself to get by? And that, well, that's a much bigger question.